We were up very early on the day of our departure, caught a bus to Heathrow, and were there before 9 o'clock. 12 of us went from Bristol, and we joined 24 more who came from Eastbourne. We had been told that our flight would be leaving at 5 minutes to 11, but this calculation had been made on winter timing, and in the event we had nearly 3 hours to wait. Our plane went direct to Amman, where we were met on arrival and taken to the Grand Palace Hotel, where we were to stay the night. In the morning we left early by coach and eventually crossed the River Jordan. There was a long wait, as there were several coaches in front of us, and every person was examined at the customs and had their baggage checked. Then a drive through the Judean hills to Jerusalem. We were staying near the Jaffa Gate, one of the gates in the ancient wall which still surrounds the old city. It dates from the time of the Turkish Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, 1538-41. The Jaffa Gate is also known as Bab el-Katil, which means the Gate of Friend, because of the Arabic inscription, "There is no God but Allah, and Abraham is his friend." Our accommodation was in a Scottish hostel for 5 nights, which was comfortable and the food good. We had a continental breakfast with plenty of fruit, or perhaps yogurt. At lunchtime we had a salad meal and a cooked meal at night. In the compound was Christ Church, which is the oldest Anglican church, consecrated in 1849. The first Anglican bishop in Jerusalem was a converted rabbi. The 10 Commandments in Hebrew are on the reredos. The site is of interest because it contains the foundations of Herod the Great's palace. Under King Herod, the country increased in prosperity, military strength, and international prestige. He captured the fortress of Jerusalem and made it his capital. David's son Solomon inherited a large and peaceful empire. He had great schemes for building, and because of this he exacted heavy taxes, and his son Rehoboam made even greater demands on his subjects. This resulted in division, and 10 northern tribes declared their independence. For the next 200 years there was hostility, and eventually under Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon in BC 598, Jerusalem was forced to surrender and was subsequently destroyed. 2 centuries later, the Greeks became world rulers, and one result of their culture was a translation of the Old Testament into Greek. But the Jews rebelled against attempts to promote Greek culture. In BC 332, Alexander the Great conquered the city. The rebelling of the Jews against Greek culture eventually led to Judas Maccabeus securing religious freedom for the Jews, and from BC 129 the government of the country was by the high priests. But Jewish independence lasted only until BC 63, when Palestine was annexed by the Romans, and Pompey, the Roman general, finally captured Jerusalem. Later, Herod the Great, wishing to gain favor with the Jews, rebuilt the temple, begun in BC 19, but the people hated his cruelty. With the coming of Jesus came the Christian Church. Resentment against the Romans caused resistant movements to form, and at first they had success. But with the arrival of reinforcements by the Romans, revolts were suppressed, and in AD 70, Jerusalem was captured and the temple destroyed. Thousands of Jews were taken to Rome as slaves. The fortress of Masada, which we visited, held out against the Romans for another 3 years. Finally, rather than surrender, the zealot defenders and their families committed suicide. Another revolt was crushed during the years 131 to 135 AD, and Jerusalem was destroyed and rebuilt as a pagan city, and Jews were forbidden to enter it. When Constantine was converted to Christianity, Jerusalem became a holy city in 326 AD, and his mother Helena visited the city to identify sites connected with Jesus' life. From then on, pilgrims flooded to Jerusalem. However, in 614 AD, Jerusalem was again devastated by the Persians, and in 638 AD, Islam conquered Jerusalem, and it became a holy city for the Muslims, because Abraham, their ancestor, had been tested there by God. In the 11th century, the Pope, Urban II, urged Christians to capture the Holy Land, and there were wars between the Crusaders and Muslims. Jerusalem was ruled by the Crusaders from 1099 until 1197, when Saladin drove them out. By 1247 the land was ruled by the Egyptians, but in 1517 it was conquered by the Turks, who kept it as their empire until World War I. For centuries, Jews scattered all over the world longed to return to Zion, the fortified hill of Jerusalem. The Zionist movement aimed to create a Jewish state of Palestine, at that time inhabited by 300,000 Muslims and Christians and a few thousand Jews. Jewish settlements were formed, and much of the barren land was reclaimed and made fertile. In 1922, the League of Nations agreed that Palestine should come under a British mandatory government, though this antagonized the Arabs who had land. Riots broke out in 1929 and 1936, and in 1939 the British government issued a white paper which limited the immigration of Jews to Palestine to 75,000 in the following 5 years. During World War II, Jews pleaded to be allowed to go to Palestine, and indeed took matters into their own hands, and 70,000 illegal immigrants, survivors of the concentration camps, were brought through the British blockade. In 1947, Britain was unable to cope and returned the mandate to the United Nations, and a special committee recommended that Palestine was to be divided into Jewish and Arab states, with Jerusalem as an international city. Israel was declared an independent state in 1948. Arabs objected to the partition because the Arab majority had less than their fair share of the region. Forces from 5 Arab states attacked Israel, and fighting continued until 1949, when there was an armistice. Jerusalem was divided, Jews no longer having access to the Western Wall, and Arab refugees unable to return home. Trouble continued, and in 1967, in the Six-Day War, Israel had gained control of the west bank of the Jordan, the Golan Heights, Gaza Strip, and the old city of Jerusalem. The Jerusalem that Christ knew lies buried beneath the present old city. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is built on a hill which Queen Helena, mother of Constantine, claimed in 326 was Golgotha. The church built by Constantine was destroyed when the Persians captured Jerusalem in 614. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is used by various Christian churches, and some have their own chapel or altar. There are Orthodox, Roman Catholic, Coptic, etc. There were always crowds of people visiting the holy sites, but often we went down after supper when there were only a few people. Near the entrance there was a slab on which the body of Christ was laid for embalming. Then the Holy Sepulchre itself, a small room, lit quite brightly, but where only 3 people at most could enter and kneel before the Holy Sepulchre. Those of you who have been to Walsingham will have seen the replica of the Holy Sepulchre there. Then there was another place where one could put a hand through a hole and touch the top of the hill of Calvary. On the Sunday morning we went to the Cathedral of St. George for Holy Communion. After the service we were invited to have a cold drink in the garden, which was simply beautiful with flowers. Another day we went along the Via Dolorosa, that is, the Way of Sorrows. In many Anglican churches there is a devotion known as the Stations of the Cross, which is performed in Lent. A reading and prayers with silence for meditation are said at every station. That is, where an incident occurred to Christ during his journey to Calvary. There are 14 stations. The first, Jesus condemned to death. 2, Jesus receives his cross. 3, Jesus falls under the weight of the cross. 4, Jesus is met by his mother. 5, the cross is laid on Simon of Cyrene. 6, the face of Jesus is wiped by Veronica. 7, Jesus falls a second time. 8, the women of Jerusalem mourn for Jesus. 9, Jesus falls the third time under the cross. 10, Jesus is stripped of his garments. 11, Jesus is nailed to the cross. 12, Jesus dies on the cross. 13, Jesus is laid in the arms of his mother. 14, Jesus is laid in the sepulchre. We visited the stations where prayers were said, sometimes in the middle of crowds, but the final stations were in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. On Sunday afternoon we went to the Mount of Olives, a tiring journey as it was hot and the hill was very steep. Then from there we went to see the beautiful church in the Garden of Gethsemane, inside which there was the rock said to be that on which was Christ's agony when he prayed. The Dome of the Rock. This is a great landmark in the city, a Muslim mosque built in AD 691, standing on the site of Solomon and Herod's temple. The great rock inside is thought to be the place where Abraham was prepared to sacrifice Isaac. There were some lovely mosaics there. The Wailing Wall. One side of the wall is for men and one for women. I don't mean one side to the other side. I mean half the wall was for women and half for men. And one has to walk backwards. I was looking for some of the others and walked down to the wall, and I saw there were little pieces of paper slipped inside the cracks in the wall, presumably requests or prayers. When I turned back to walk back, still looking for the rest of the party, I noticed that everyone was walking backwards, so I quickly turned myself round and walked in that way. Another day we went to Bethlehem, which is about 12 miles south of Jerusalem. We went by coach. Bethlehem means, as I expect you know, the house of bread. The church in Manger Square is claimed to be the oldest Christian church in the world. It was constructed in AD 325. As one approached the church, it was evident that the small door through which we were to enter had been built subsequent to a much larger door, the outline of which was visible. Apparently the smaller door was made to prevent people riding on horseback into the church. During the Persian conquest in the 7th century, the ancient church was spared because, as the invaders approached, they saw a representation of the Magi on the wall in Persian dress. Nearby was the church in the shepherd's field, but we were told there was more than one place where the shepherds were. The next day we went on to Masada. On the way we visited Qumran, where the cave is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. The Dead Sea Scrolls were found by an Arab who was looking for a stray sheep. He threw a stone into a cave to disturb the sheep if it were there. Instead of a bleat, he heard the sound of broken pottery. Since then, archaeologists have discovered more than 500 scrolls. They were discovered in 1948, and the scrolls confirm the accuracy of our present Bible. It is adjacent to the southern end of the Dead Sea. It is 1,300 feet high on the plateau and was built by Herod as a sumptuous palace. This is where the Zealots held out for 3 years against the Romans, and rather than be conquered they took their own lives. It has been said that Herod prepared this fortress fortress as a refuge in time of need against two dangers which he imagined. One, that the Jewish people might depose him and put a king of the royal throne which had reigned before him on the throne, and the second fear was that of Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt. We had to go up by cable car. Excavations are still proceeding, and the synagogue has been found and ritual baths. We went into the Dead Sea, which is too salt for one to swim, but only float. The water has 8 times the concentration of salt of ordinary seawater. Other chemicals are found in it, and the government of Israel is developing thriving chemical industries. The level of the water is 1,291 feet below sea level. There are no birds about because there are no fish, no seaweed or shells, virtually nothing living. We saw fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the shrine of the book in Jerusalem. From Jerusalem we travelled north to Tiberias, on the shore of the Lake of Galilee. Here we stayed in another Scottish hostel, in a lovely situation near the lake. While there we visited Capernaum, which is a ruined city. It has been an important town on the trade route from Damascus to the coast and on to Egypt. The site was hidden until in 1920 excavators discovered it. One ruin was labelled St. Peter's House. The synagogue was found, and because of a flight of steps, it is known to be an advanced design for the 2nd century, and so it is thought to have been built on the site of the one in Christ's time. Jesus chose Capernaum as the headquarters of his Galilean ministry. Other exhibits we saw were grain mills and oil presses of Roman times. Caesarea. This is another city built by Herod the Great, and here we saw the remains of a famous aqueduct. It was named in honor of Caesar Augustus. We went to the foothills of Mount Hermon and the source of the Jordan River, where people collected some of the water in bottles. Acre. The biblical name is Acre. This was an ancient walled town built by the Phoenicians and defended by them for centuries. Richard the Lionheart captured the town during his crusade. Nazareth. Here we visited the magnificent Church of the Annunciation. It was a very busy town. As the owner of beetle, I was interested to count 45 beetles in and near the town. Then on to Cana, of which we were told that it was doubtful that this was really the scene of the miracle. In the afternoon we went to Mount Tabor, the scene of the Transfiguration. There was the most beautiful church here to the Transfiguration. On Sunday we were in Tiberias. Holy Communion was celebrated in a room in the hotel where we were staying. Then soon after breakfast we crossed the Lake of Galilee by steamer. At the other side we met a man, a Jew, who told us that when he came to this place 50 years previously, there had not been any trees, but now there were many after he had arranged the planting of them. We had lunch in a kibbutz. I had heard of kibbutzes and thought that they were simple, poor, communal places, but certainly all those to which we went for meals were very nice indeed and provided a good meal. We swam in the Sea of Galilee, which was pleasantly warm, and then returned to the hostel. This was really the end of the pilgrimage as such, but from Tiberias we returned again to Jordan. We had seen the source of the river, and now we had to cross it again. We visited 3 different ancient civilizations. First, Jerash, which is a superb example of a provincial Roman city.